Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hal Shurtleff, and I am the coordinator for New England for the John Birch Society. And we're here at the Hartford State House in Hartford, Connecticut, and we're here to discuss the Article 5 Convention, otherwise known as a CONCON, why we must not have one. And before I get into it, I want to read from the U.S. Constitution, Article 5, and it may have been the first time the Constitution's read in this hallway in a number of years. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution or on the application of the legislators of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for the purpose for proposing amendments. Note it's plural, it's not singular, amendments, okay? Which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislators of 3/4 of the several states or by conventions in 3/4 thereof. And I'll get into that a little bit as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress, provided that no amendment which may be made prior to the year 1808 shall in any matter affect the first and fourth clauses in the 9th section of the first article, and that no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. So Congress can change the mode of ratification, and they've done that with the 21st Amendment that repealed prohibition. They figured that they wouldn't have enough states that would actually repeal prohibition, so they decided to establish ratifying committees. And even in so-called these dry states like Utah, they were able to pass the 21st Amendment. And we're not here to discuss whether or not the 21st Amendment should have been, 18 should have been repealed. That's not the issue. The issue is the vehicle, how it was done. And it's also important to point out that under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, Congress can do everything necessary and proper to carry this convention out. And there are a number of legal scholars that will tell you Congress will set the rules for this convention. Now, we had one convention like this under the United States Articles of Confederation. And under the Articles of Confederation, Article 13 said that all 13 states, had to approve of any amendments, any changes. And at this convention, and a number of the delegates were given sort of broad authority, which really proves our point, that this convention, the old one and the proposed one, are sovereign bodies. They may change the mode of ratification. So they changed the mode of ratification in 1787, and we're sort of glad they did. They gave us a great document, probably one of the greatest documents to govern mankind in the history of mankind. And they did allow, Article 5 is definitely a constitutional provision. There's no one's arguing that, but there's lots of problems and lots of concerns. Let me give you a little brief history of the Article 5 calls. 1789, there was a call it was the first one. I think it was Virginia. Then Rhode Island had one. And from then up until now, there's been over 700 calls for conventions. The first 100 years or so, they were just calls for an Article 5 without any purpose written down. They may have been motivated by various things, but the Constitution doesn't say list the reason for the convention and then propose it. A call is a call, no matter what it's for. And we came very close in the middle of the early part of the last century, when there was a movement to have a general election or election of senators. U.S. senators were chosen under before the 17th Amendment was there. State legislators would choose the members of the Senate. And when the 17th Amendment was passed, states lost a lot of its power. To me, that was why would the states destroy their power? What happened was senators would be chosen. They had to come back to the states with the tax bill, right? Congress, the House of Representatives, would promise their constituents the world, and then the Senate said, well, gee, we can't do that. We had to vote no. But there was a big populist movement back then, and they were able to get this thing through, 17th Amendment. So they were 2 states away. Then there have been calls over the years for different reasons, but there wasn't any major drive until the early mid-70s, a call for a balanced budget amendment. Now, the notion of a balanced budget amendment is very appealing to most people who have a conservative perspective. But if you read the fine print, and if we have a few attorneys in the audience, they know well hand that you have to read the whole amendment. Most of the proposed amendments still allow for an unbalanced budget, national emergency, or I think the one that Mark Levin is promoting, that's 26 states have to be able to override to make sure you can have an unbalanced budget, which actually really radically changes our Constitution. And this is a conservative guy. And we contend that you need to have a constitutional budget. A balanced budget doesn't mean that you're cutting the size and scope of government, that you're going to rein in this out-of-control federal monster. And that's one of the arguments of our supporters of an Article 5. We have to rein in this out-of-control federal government. Well, I contend that you have states that are out of control as well. Here in Connecticut, I'm sure a lot of people agree, when this draconian gun laws that passed lately, right? In New York State and on and on. So anyway, that was defeated. We were 2 states away. 32 states had called for a balanced budget amendment, Article 5 convention, back by 85, 86. I think Ronald Reagan getting elected had something to do with the movement sort of died a little bit. And what we realized in the John Birch Society is that some of these old calls that go back to the 1800s, since there's no sunset clause on the resolutions, that they may be valid. So we made a lot of effort from say late 1990s up until today to have states rescind all of their calls. And we got about 13 states to do that. It was a lot of work. Nobody was paying any attention. Most people had no interest in this issue. We'd visit state houses and people would nod their heads and say, yeah, I'll help you out. And we got nowhere in many states. But we were able to get 13 states to listen. New Hampshire was sort of a shining crown because it took us 20 years. Every 2 years we submit the same resolution to rescind all of your calls. And finally in 2010, when you had a Democrat majority in the House, which was the first time since World War I that you had a Democrat majority, we had Liberty Republicans submit the resolution, and it was voted overwhelmingly to repeal all of the calls. And then 2 years later, they passed it again. So they have a live call there in New Hampshire. Right now, we think, depending on how you tabulate it, there are about 20 states that have live calls for a Constitution Convention. In 2011, 2012, a group, the Goldwater Institute, which is supposed to be a free market type group named after the late Barry Goldwater, came up with something called Compact of the States or Compact for the States. And I think it was a little too complex for most people. They wanted to have governors and some legislators from these states go to Dallas on July 4th, and that would have been sort of a pseudo-quasi-convention. And that could have been considered a con-con. And that was even defeated in Arizona on their home field. And I tell you, having people go to Dallas July 4th, probably wasn't the best place to go. Maybe the rates were low in the hotels, but I mean, if they came up to Hartford, maybe it's a little bit cooler, a little bit more user-friendly. They may have had to pull it off. Then in September of 2011, this was sort of the big push. This is where the modern movement came from. There was a forum at Harvard University Law School. No friend, by the way, of limited government and the Constitution for like 4 generations, right? And this forum was supposed to be, both sides will be represented there, right? We're going to sit around there and we're going to just talk about this, a nice little conference. Well, I tried to be a panelist. I mean, I don't have a law degree, but I've been involved since 1988. I think I have some credentials. And if I couldn't be there, we would have somebody we could dig up a couple of lawyers from the Birch Society that would be happy to sit in and be a panelist. They never returned my phone calls, never got back to me by email. They really didn't want both sides. Indeed, the only person that was allowed to give the other side was a colleague who was a professor at the Harvard Law School, Professor Lawrence Tribe, who was a liberal, but on this issue he's very sound. And there's a lot of liberals, by the way, that are very sound on this issue. In fact, they say politics makes strange bedfellows, and I'm going to mention some of the strange bedfellows who are pushing this in a few minutes. So I got there as a media representative for the John Birch Society's publication, The New American. I spent a day there. My colleague, Dan McGonigal, was on the outside talking to people, handing out literature, and I had a friend that was inside just sort of taking notes. And at this conference, it's very, very interesting that you had Mark Meckler, He was the founder of the Tea Party Patriots. Here's a man, in his own words, that never got involved in this issue, got involved with the Tea Party groups, the Liberty Movement in general, until about 2007. He was a real estate attorney. And before you know it, he's the go-to guy. And he's co-sponsoring this event at Harvard University. It's like being a sergeant and getting promoted to a 4-star general overnight, you know. The media, the corporate media, very seldom calls us, right? Every once in a while, you know. If we do something bad, you know, some of us gets caught doing, then you're going to get all the media coverage in the world. But when it comes to analysis and sound analysis, they don't tend to really want to have much to do with you, right? So we're kind of used to that. We don't really expect the corporate media to give us much attention. So at this event also were representatives from Common Cause, which is a far-left advocacy group founded by Rockefeller Money back in the early 70s. Some people do a little research on that. A man named, I think it was Richard Gardner, who was the first head of this group. Then you had representatives from the Coffee Party. Occupy Wall Street were also there. In fact, I met a lady who she gave me a business card, a very distinguished-looking young lady from New Jersey. She had Occupy Wall Street there. And you had a group from there, a man named Senk, I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong. One of these days I'm going to get it right. Senk Erger, if I'm pronouncing it right, of Young Turks. And by the way, this Young Turks group is funded by George Soros. And Mr. Ergar, I think pronouncing his name right, I hope, he was the founder of Wolfpack. Now do a little search, go to Wolfpack's website and see what they advocate. They're advocating an amendment to the Constitution through an Article 5 to do away with the notion of corporate personhood. Now that may or may not be legitimate. I don't think it really is. But they also want to have government funding of elections. Kind of interesting. And in fact, we testified, Dan and Mr. McGonigal and I testified, and they're advocating getting big money out of politics. And I'm not necessarily against that. And when I testified, I said we should get big money out of this Article 5 convention route. And I said the Koch brothers are funding the right side through ALEC and a few other groups. And I said that Soros is funding Wolfpack. And there were 3 representatives from Wolfpack there, and they howled behind me. They didn't like it. So one of the attorneys from Brooklyn, New York, came up to me and said, "You need to give me proof." I said, "Well, sure, I'll send it to you." And what I did was we did an article in New American, Soros and Socialists fighting for funding in Article 5. And the article makes reference to another article. So this attorney got back to me, and he told me I had a flagrant disregard for the truth. That's a nice way of calling me a liar, right? And he said, "You need to do your research." So I researched a little deeper. I just went to the next level. And there was this Soros-funded media consortium, I think it's what they call it. And on there are all the groups that he funds, including Young Turks. I said, the money trail is pretty close. Young Turks founder is also the founder of your group. They're working pretty good. That, to me, is enough evidence. He didn't get back to me. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's still supporting this drive for an Article 5. So the other group, the big group that's pushing it, is Convention of the States. This is something that's been a few years old. Mark Meckler, also a man named Mike Farris of Homeschooling Defense Association. And it's kind of interesting why he would be involved in this. It's almost perplexing because usually he would have nothing to do with anything that doesn't directly affect homeschooling. But he's a big supporter of something called parental rights, an amendment called Parental Rights Amendment. And while it may sound appealing when you look at it, well, of course parents have some rights. The Constitution, if you're a constitutionalist, doesn't address parental rights because you have those rights. And in spite of bad Supreme Court decisions, that doesn't make it right if the Supreme Court makes a bad decision. So his amendment would federalize all relations between children and parents. That will be the inevitable result. That's the only result. And so I don't know quite why that's the case. And if you go to their website, they have all kinds of refuting our positions, and I just want to mention a couple that are important. They claim that we have nothing to worry about. There'll never be a runaway convention. And I'd like to define what's runaway mean. Does that mean you'll have a bunch of people at this convention? The delegates, by the way, they don't even know who these delegates will be. Have no idea. And there'll be some crazy amendments being proposed, and that 3/4 of the states would never ratify unreasonable amendments. And that's the argument both groups on the left and right use. Well, I contend that what's reasonable to me might be very unreasonable to somebody from Wolfpack. I think we should repeal the 16th Amendment, right? That's horribly unreasonable. I think we should privatize all schooling and get rid of compulsory education laws. Oh, that's terribly unreasonable to a Wolfpack person, right? But maybe an amendment to fund abortions is to someone on the left, is very reasonable. So that's a subjective term. That doesn't hold any water, right? And they never tell you that Congress can appoint ratifying committees. So the states, once they pass the resolutions, may never have anything to do with it after that, right? They tell you there's no crazy amendments out there. Well, if you look at some of the calls, like Hawaii, they want to have an amendment to make Obamacare constitutional. Well, what does that mean, folks? If they have to have an amendment to make it constitutional, it can't be constitutional now. They want to have an amendment to do away with the Electoral College. They want to have an amendment to do away with the supermajority when it comes to Senate treaties, from 2/3 to a supermajority. Can you imagine how many treaties would have been passed if it hadn't been for that wonderful safety net there? And we've seen a lot of these Article 5 calls, and they're not so good. Now, they also claim that we have 26 states that have Republican governors and Republican majorities, right? That doesn't make me sleep well at night, folks, right? Does it make you feel well? And by the way, let's suppose that all these 26 governors and all the legislators were constitutionalists. How about 2 years from now, when this convention may be held? Because these resolutions, there's no sunset clause. So then what happens? You see? So what happens if you have a Democrat majority? Or who knows what kind of majority you have? So that doesn't work out. And again, the notion, the other one is that the delegates will be given instructions. Well, they can ignore the instructions. They're a sovereign body. And there are some states that want to pass laws to criminalize any actions if they go beyond the authority. What are they going to do? They're going to put them in jail for 6 months or fine them? You can challenge that for years in court, right? You got some attorneys here. Would you challenge that in court? Yeah. Can you commit a crime in a state when you're outside that state? That's going to be interesting, right? And again, if I want to take on the Constitution, I don't care if I go to jail for 6 months. I'm going to, I'll be a martyr, you see. They wouldn't dare do that. So that holds no water. And they appeal to your emotions. Let's make history. Like, wow, yeah, but there's good history and bad history. Right, so there's all kinds of, you don't want to make that kind of, yes, we're going to trash the Constitution, we're going to make history all right. No, but it's not the kind of history we want to make. And if you go to their frequently asked questions, I guess the biggest argument in our defense is that if you add new amendments, how will any new amendments make people who don't obey the amendments already? How would that make any difference, right? And so you look at that and you say, their argument is that the founders, the people who wrote the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, had no idea that they would misconstrue things the way they have. So we will write these amendments in a way that cannot be misinterpreted. What does shall not mean? That's pretty clear. Congress shall not, shall not, shall not. But they're still doing it, right? And and they talk about I mentioned a runaway Congress or a runaway federal government. Well, many of these people support the policies of those runaway federal governments, right? Mark Levin supports these unlimited wars around the world without congressional approval, without congressional declaration of war. That's costing us trillions of dollars. So, and many of these people support the same politicians that bring that about. The Wolfpack argument was that Congress has a 6% approval rating. Well, fine. When I testified, I said, we have a remedy that's better than Article 5. They're called elections. And every 2 years, we can have a nonviolent revolution at the ballot box by electing people that would obey their oath of office. So, and again, states will never do anything crazy or irrational. They're doing it without a con-con. 46 states or 48 states, I think it was 46 states, took on Common Core without even seeing it. They took the money, and the federal government said, you take Common Core, we'll give you the money, but you're going to take Common Core sight unseen. And now they get a grassroots movement to get rid of it. All 50 states are implementing some aspects of Agenda 21, something that stems from the United Nations. And only 2 states in the last several years have taken exception to it. Connecticut is completely enamored by Agenda 21. And so far, legislators have done nothing about that. And there are many, many other, and if these states want to get the balance back, that's another thing, get the balance of power. The states take their federal money, give it back. That's the best way to do it, and invoke the 10th Amendment, the nullification. And the people who give us, the people who are promoting this Article 5, like Mark Levin, will refer to people who say that as neo-Confederates. I don't know, I'd rather be called a neo-Confederate maybe than a neo-conservative. But people don't realize that the 10th Amendment was used to nullify the fugitive slave laws. People don't realize that back in the 1850s. And more recently, they nullified it. States had said no to the Real ID Act. There was a friend of mine up in New Hampshire, Jen Coffey, that got the ball rolling. New Hampshire was the first state, and left and right, both sides said, we're not going to abide by this. The law is still on the books, but there are numerous states that said, hell no, we won't go. And the federal government said, we'll give you a few more years. Don't worry, we'll give you a few more years. So states can, that's one of the most important aspects. The states can say no and nullify. So after the press conference, what we're going to do is we're going to be visiting our elected officials. I hate to use the word lobbying, because when you think of lobbying, you think of some guys with cigars and back rooms that are giving politicians money. We are the employers of the people in this State House. So we're simply giving instructions to our employees that they should say no to any new calls for an Article 5 convention and repeal your state's old calls, and there's several on the books that go back many years. And what we're handing out is a reprint from the New American magazine, Levin's Risky Proposal, that goes into his book that was published August of 2013, and a little CD, a 12-minute CD that we're encouraging the legislators to listen to as they drive home, since I don't think they bicycle or take commuter rail. Most of them drove here by car. And this was legislators from Oklahoma that successfully pulled out all of their state's calls about 3 or 4 years ago. So with that, I want to turn the floor over to my distinguished colleague and historian, Daniel McGonigal of Boston. And by the way, Dan and I have been making the rounds to state houses in the region, and tomorrow we'll be heading up to Vermont. So Dan, why don't you come on and give us a good lesson on the Constitution.
Thank you, Hal. I've known Hal for several years, and in the northeast part of the country here, he's a great 21st century American patriot. I've had the pleasure of working with Hal on several projects in the past, and this is an important project, this informing legislators and the people of the dangers of a Article 5 constitutional convention. And the point I want to make briefly, to follow up Hal's statements, is the fact that enforcement, not amendment, is the answer and the solution. And that's the title of an article by the 21st century's top constitutional scholar, Dr. Edwin Vieira Jr., and the same idea has been mentioned in the New American magazine over the past few years in several articles. This is Dr. Vieira's article, Enforcement Not Amendment is the Answer. And I just want to repeat a statement from this article here. The all-important question remains to be answered by the people in the liberty movement who are proposing a constitutional convention. Exactly how are the new amendments to be enforced? And then he states, the states can execute, that is, enforce the Constitution according to its true original intent. Now, the same principle, going back 2010, New American article here, states should enforce, not revise or amend the Constitution. Here's another New American article, repair versus restore. why the Constitution doesn't need an Article fix, an Article 5 fix. In other words, we need to restore the Constitution and not fix it through an Article 5 convention. Here's another New American article, Dangers of a Constitutional Convention. And at the end of the article, it talks about the necessity to safely restore good government and facilitate adherence to the Constitution. And this is the article that we're handing out today to the state legislators and the leadership. Levin's risky proposal, a constitutional convention. And at the end of this article, the same statement is repeated twice. It says the solution is to enforce the Constitution, not to change or ignore it. So we're hearing the same principle repeated several times over the past several years. And the Vieira article goes into great detail and provides the actual solution. Now I'm tying this all together. Now at the root of enforcement of the Constitution, what are we exactly enforcing? What does the Constitution do? Well, people enter society, and the purpose of government is the common defense of life, liberty, and property. This is confirmed by Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Samuel Adams, Frederick Bastiat, and other great philosophers. The Constitution itself states the same thing twice, once in the preamble and once in Article 1, Section 8. It says, provide for the common defense, that common defense of life, liberty, and property. In Article 6 of the Constitution, it states, this Constitution shall be the supreme law of the land. In my research, I have confirmed that the people organized at state, county, and local levels are enumerated to be called forth to execute the laws. Now, I just stated the Constitution is the supreme law. Okay, so the people, when necessary, shall be called forth to execute the laws, to provide for the common defense of life, liberty, and property. And this is the execution that Dr. Vieira was talking about when he said enforcement, not amendment, is the answer. Also in my research, I have a book by the top constitutional scholar of the late 19th century, Thomas Cooley. His book, General Principles of Constitutional Law in the United States of America, 1880, he stated, the only restriction imposed on the power to amend is this, and he quotes Article 5, that no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. What does that mean? It means a convention could only be limited to not changing the equal number of U.S. senators per state. Everything else, according to this Article 5 quote here, everything else in the Constitution could be up for change. So there we have a danger, and when they talk about a runaway convention, that's what they're talking about. So therefore, there's no guarantee that a convention would be limited to a single or just a few amendments. And in closing, it's up to the people, we the people and the states, and the state legislators, to restore constitutional enforcement. And it can be done simply by passing a single statute in each state. Thank you.
Might be viewing this on on YouTube or whatever vehicles, we encourage you to learn about this issue. And if you get the camera on our beautiful banner, we have a website, jbs.org, and you can go to the website and there's drop downs. You'll see information about this particular issue. A Facebook page called Choose Freedom. Stop a CON. When we say CON, we mean Article 5 Convention. And also, there's several other groups that are fighting this. DefendNotAmend.com. They also have a Facebook page. And there's actually more and more individuals and groups that are, as we go, that are jumping on board and fighting this. So we encourage you to learn about the issue, look at both sides, ask questions, ask us questions, and ask the folks pushing this questions as well. And then contact your elected officials, in person, preferably by email or phone, but in person. And we hope that when you do your research, that you will conclude that we should not have one, and that you'll get involved with our campaign. So thank you very much for coming out, and we're going to be a little busy here at getting this information out to legislators. And we're going to be following up as well. And I do want to mention, I did mention earlier, that currently there are no live calls or new resolutions in Connecticut, so we need to stop any new calls, a little preventive maintenance. Because I know the other side has been probably already in communication. If you're a Republican, you probably received Mark Levin's book, and if you're a Democrat, you probably got some information from Wolfpack already. So we have to take a little maintenance here. So with that, we want to thank you, and we'll see you down the road. God bless you.